Today, I want to show you how to recreate this rain freeze effect inside a Blender from one of Jennie's new music videos, Handlebars. The minute I saw this effect, I wanted to figure it out and share it with you all. My name is DJ from Eternal Visuals. Let's not waste any time, let's get into it. In order to pull off this rain effect, I decided to go outside right after a rainstorm to film near a local train stop to get a similar look and feel. I parked my car at an angle to use as a foreground element to create more depth. You don't want to film while it's raining out because then you can't control the rest of the scene. You want a wet environment but not raining. I also made sure to keep mostly everything in focus in the middle and the background. So stay away from shallow depth of field. We will be faking this focus adjustment in post. Once you have your shot, scrub through to the sequence until the point where you snap your fingers. I exported the frame in Premiere Pro, then opened up Blender. I deleted the default cube and light. I hit 1 on my keyboard to move the camera to front view, then hit Ctrl-Alt Numpad 0 to adjust the camera to that angle. Then with the camera selected, move the camera up using G then Z to move the height of the camera from the ground to approximately the same height as the tripod. In the Settings tab, I also adjusted the frame rate and the focal length to match my footage. Very important. I'll also be using cycles as the render engine. Make sure your GPU is enabled. Now for the rain. Hit Shift A on your keyboard, select Mesh, then Plane. Hit S on your keyboard until the width of the plane passes the borders of your camera. Then hit G, then Z to lift the plane until it's in the sky and past the camera's border. Then hit Tab to enter edit mode, then Ctrl R to make a loop cut. Use the scroll wheel on your mouse to create lots of loops on both the X and Y axis, and make sure that you have enough data for your particle system. Go back to object mode by hitting Tab again, and then with the plane selected, hit Ctrl A, all transforms. Now to add the particle system. Over to the right, select the Particles tab, then hit the plus icon to make sure it's set to emission. Increase the amount of particles to 10,000 and the start time to -50. This will make sure the rain is already falling when you hit play. We also want to change the lifetime to 1000. This is so the rain won't disappear while in the middle of falling. Now it's time to make your raindrops. Hit Shift A, then Mesh, Sphere. Scale the sphere down slightly, then move it out of the camera frame using G then X. Then hitting the Shader Editor tab, create a new material. Select the principled BSTF, then delete. Hit Shift A and search for glass shader. Attach the glass shader to the material output. Then adjust the IOR, or index of refraction. So change it to 1.05. Now go back to our main layout tab. In order to make the particles the glass spheres, we need to go into our particle system render settings and change the item from halo to object, and then select the object sphere. Now all your particles should be our glass spheres. We are now going to stop time with our particle raindrops. Find the moment in your timeline where you want the raindrops to start to freeze. Bring the playhead to about 30 frames. Then go to the Physics tab inside your particle system. And under Integration, right-click the time step setting and select Insert Keyframe. Move the playhead to where you want the freeze, and then bring the time step down to 0. Then right-click again, Insert Keyframe. Now when you play it back, you should have falling raindrops that then freeze. If your raindrops are too big or small for the scene, you can always go under the Render tab inside the particle system and adjust the size. I moved the keyframes on the timeline until I found a raindrop close enough so that when it freezes, there's a raindrop that is center frame, so I'll be able to zoom in seamlessly. Now let's get our footage reflection. Hit Shift A, Image, and then Mesh Plane. If you don't have this option, you can always go into Preferences and enable images as planes. Once imported, move your image back using G then Y until it reaches the end of your plane. Then hit S to scale the image until it reaches your camera borders. Then head over to the shading editor and plug your image texture into the emission shader on the principled BSTF. Hold down Z and up cursor so that you can preview your image in rendered mode. Increase the emission until you see the reflection clearly in the raindrops. Now that we have our falling rain, freeze, and reflection, we need to prep for our render. To get rid of our still frame in the background, but keep the reflection of the raindrops, we need to make sure our image is selected, then go to Object Properties, Visibility, then Disable Camera. We also need to add motion blur to our raindrops and a transparent background. In the Render tab, and under Film, enable Transparent. In order to get long streaks of rain, we need to check off motion blur. I actually increased it to 3.0 until the rain freezes. I keyframed it back to 0.5 once it's frozen. I also did a focus adjustment. I made sure to keep the default aperture and focal length as is, but during the 30th frame difference, I keyframed the focal length from far away to where my body would be, and then lowered the aperture and focal length to blur out the background. One addition I made to the camera movement was once the raindrop was in the center of the frame, I did this by keyframing the focal distance of the main raindrop. Then once the camera was inside the water drop, I eyedropped the focal distance and created a new keyframe. Once these are all in place and I was happy with the sequence, I went back to the particle system and in the cache settings, baked the dynamics. Your render will not come out properly if you don't do this. I also adjusted the samples to 128. Make sure your PNG settings are set to RGBA to make sure there's a transparent background and 16-bit. Then created a file path to save our PNGs to. Then press render. For some reason, the first couple frames in the render went in a different direction. I just left it and continued the render. Once all of our frames are rendered, I opened up After Effects. I went to the file path where they were saved as images, selected the first normal frame without any glitches, then scrolled down and shift-clicked the last frame. Once all the frames are selected, I clicked PNG Sequence. Once imported, I right-click the sequence, hit Interpret Footage, then Main. This is to make sure that the frame rate matches your footage. Then I right-clicked the sequence again and selected Comp from Selection. Once inside the comp, the only effect I added was a fast box blur to the rain before the freeze to make the rain streaks even longer. I changed the blur dimensions to vertical only, then moved the playhead on the timeline to 1 second and increased the blur radius by 475. Then moved 15 frames forward and decreased the blur radius back to 0 before the droplets freeze. Then I went to Composition, Add to Render Queue. Under Output Module, I selected QuickTime as the format and RGB plus alpha as the output channel to make sure it keeps its transparent background. I changed the file location, then hit render. Once exported, I jumped back into Premiere Pro. I imported the render sequence, then overlapped the comp on top of the footage. I found the section in the timeline where the snap lines up with the freezing rain. Then I extended the footage to match up with the rest. In order for the rain to match the footage better, I decreased the shadows all the way and increased my contrast slightly. Use the sliders on the lumetri color to make sure it feels right. Now for the footage effects. To imitate the focal lens distance shift, we are going to add a camera blur effect to our footage. Then when the camera stops refocusing, create a new keyframe. A level of 6 seemed to work for me. Find the spot in the timeline where the focal lens shift starts to happen in the Blender render. Create a keyframe at 0. Then right-click and ease out and in on the keyframes. And finally, a scale adjustment. In the effects controls, create a scale keyframe at the point where the camera starts to move forward into the raindrop. Then, on the final frame, scale the footage. I ended up scaling about 219%. Then easing out the first scale keyframe, and you're done. I added an adjustment layer to create a matrix style color palette, but you can create any style you want. I had so much fun figuring out this effect and refining it over time. One of my favorite parts about it is that you don't need an HDRI or any other elements, just in focus footage. I hope you learned something today and can't wait to see you in the next one.